known me for a while, you know I wear makeup quite a bit, especially when I record. The only reason why I don't wear makeup more is because I am lazy and I don't feel like going through the effort. But much like my hair, I am not afraid to experiment with my face. And for the longest time, my brand of choice was Morphe Cosmetics. Now, if you don't know, Morphe, within the last 2 years or so, was found out to have a lot of chemicals and things in their eyeshadow palette specifically that are not safe for its intended use. Now, they try to get away with it by saying that they never called it an eyeshadow, they called it an artistry palette. However, tell me this isn't an eyeshadow palette. It's a disaster of one because I've used it so much, but tell me this isn't an eyeshadow palette. So for a good while, I was a little depressed because I felt like I couldn't wear eye makeup because anytime I put eye makeup on, specifically this stuff, my eyes would just start tearing up and I would basically ruin anything that I was trying to accomplish, which gave me a lot of sadness. But then I found out about the class action lawsuit and all of the drama that was happening, and it made me realize that I am not the problem. However, I have several Morphe palettes because it was my go-to. So I don't want to just throw these away because, like, I spent a fair amount of money on all of these palettes and I love the colors in them. And so I got to thinking and spending time on TikTok. I had an art channel for a while back in the day and I just thought, why not turn all of this eyeshadow into watercolor? My general choice of medium was usually watercolor, and usually because I could throw something together quickly. Was it good? Debatable, but it was quick. You can't deny that. But I wanted to do a little bit of digging first, so that's what we're gonna do. To the computer. Okay, so watercolor. It's old, like really old, like extremely old. Like, some say watercolor is as old as art itself. Now, whether the original watercolor paintings were truly watercolor is more of an issue of semantics. That's not what we're getting into today. Watercolor, as we understand it today, seems to have taken off more around the time of the Renaissance, particularly with the work of Albrecht Dürer. Butchered that name. It's on the screen. His work was particularly influential when considering the techniques that he was using, and especially considering a lot of those techniques are staples in watercolor today, such as layering and doing wet on wet. Right now though, I'm not so much interested in the art as I am in the materials. Old watercolor paints were very similar to what we understand sumie ink sticks to be today. Basically blocks of like clayish, hard ink pigment that you kind of have to work to dissolve in water before you can actually use it. Enter William Reeves in the mid to late 1700s with his hard watercolor pans. These were particularly revolutionary as they did not require nearly as much work to be able to access the material. That's a long-winded way of saying that these paints could be activated using a brush in water rather than having to grind. And the history starts to get a little bit confusing at this point because then we get into soft pans, and then somewhere along the way we introduce tubes of paint, but that is also not the direction that I was going with this video. Today, I am most interested in those pans. But I also had to think about, you know, what is watercolor made of? Because one thing that's interesting with watercolor, unlike, say, oil paint, is it's a little misleading. Because oil paint is pigment mixed with oil, and then you have oil paint. Watercolor is not water mixed with pigment. It is pigment mixed with some sort of binding agent and then diluted and activated with water. But that does beg the question of why can't we just mix pigment with water? Well, eyeshadow pigment and water to see if that makes watercolor. So I'm going to come in with a dry brush and a dry palette. I'm just going to grab this black here. And as you might expect, it's kind of flaky. It's basically the same as if I was drawing with chalk. But then if I come in, I'm going to put some water on my brush here. I'm going to kind of add some water to the shadow. First of all, notice how that kind of pills up. It doesn't really soak in. The pigment is a little water repulsed. But then I come in, it doesn't give me a whole lot of color. And I don't know if you can see that really well, but I can see how the pigment is sort of separating from the water. So I get this really chalky look. So it's gonna be a no for me. I don't like what we just did there. Quite disliked that. Back to you at the computer. So watercolor, it's a binder. Usually that binder has water in it and a pigment. The most common binder is gum arabic, which comes from tree sap, although some sources suggest that other gums could also be used. Generally, the gum arabic binder is mixed with distilled water and glycerin and or honey, which helps to keep the paint soft for reactivation later. For most tutorials online, people will mix their gum arabic binder together first and then come in with our pigment as sort of the final step. Although there are some sources online that suggest you can just plop everything together at once. As for pigment, mica powder tends to be the most commonly suggested. So I do want to point out that while mica powder is pretty common in eyeshadow, there's usually a whole host of other ingredients that are also involved. So my eyeshadow might not be the best possible use of pigment, but it's what we have. And so without further ado, let's go make some paint. So let's talk supplies. I have a muller, which is basically just a flat glass piece that has a handle for easy gripping. I have a couple of palette knives. I could probably get by with just this one, but I feel comfortable having options. I have a painted glass. This came out of a picture frame, so pretty cheap. I also have a syringe to transfer my gum arabic, a spray bottle just for easy cleanup, and then for my ingredients, I have a pre-mixed bottle of gum arabic solution. I could make my own, but I don't want to. And then I will be using the Jaclyn Hill palette, volume 2, for my pigments today. Comparison, I have my water pigments from earlier, and now I just want to see what it looks like as watercolor. This is the exact same eyeshadow, and just see how much smoother that is now. The only difference is these two were just eyeshadow and water, and this one was the eyeshadow with the binder and water. So just to address some final things, one, I overfilled the pans. That's intentional, because ultimately right now the paint is not in its final form. It will dry out over time and achieve that dry, cakey consistency. While it dries, it's obviously going to lose moisture, which means that it's also going to lose mass. So the final product is going to take up much less space. So while the pan is overfilled right now, I expect that'll probably be about half as full when it's fully cured. But just from this one swatch alone, I'm really happy with the color and the consistency and the vibrancy of the color, and I'm really excited to get through more of the eyeshadows. So thank you so much for joining me today while I make watercolor. If you want to see me make other things and learn about other things and show you other things, let me know in the comments below. Subscribe, like this video, all of those typical YouTuber things, and I will see you next time.